Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our session today on sustainable investment. I am Susan Mac Cormac, and I have a fabulous panel that I'm very pleased to be presenting with today. First, we have Anne Funiken. Did I pronounce it right?
Yeah.
We have Clifton, otherwise known as Cliff Gibbons. And I'm looking for my notes. I'm sorry for a second. Hold on just a minute. Then we have Vicki Fuller, and we have Scott Minard, and I've been practicing for this all afternoon. We have Marcus Voigt. Did I get it right? Okay, very good. Welcome. We're going to be talking a little bit today about sustainability, and I thought it would be good to first define sustainability and sustainable investment, because that term, like a lot of other terms, often gets confused. It really focuses on specific elements, and really elements related to environmental and social and governance that are, many people believe, material to operations. Other impact investment is really investment first, driving for returns. But as Vicki does and a lot of people on the stage do, people who honestly believe that if you focus on ESG factors, you will in fact have better returns. So with that background, I'd really like the panel now to take a couple minutes, and starting with you and Cliff Robbins. And one of the things I'd like you to talk about is your career, because you came from sort of more mainstream private equity, and I believe you're the founder now of a fund that is investing specifically for ESG.
Yeah, so before I started Blue Harbor back in 2004, I had spent almost 17 years as a partner at KKR and General Atlantic, so I came from the private equity world. And our fund, Blue Harbor, we call it a private equity approach to the public markets, which means we take large stakes in public companies with the support of the board, backing management teams, and then get involved like a private equity fund to try to drive value.
People assume we're referring to concessionary capital, but as you're going to hear on this panel, we're not. And in fact, the investors are looking at this space and investing because they believe it is good, short-term or long-term business. And on that, Scott, would you like to share your perspective from Guggenheim?
Sure. Well, Susan, I've kind of gotten tired of talking about sustainability because in a lot of ways, I think it's become a new buzzword.
Vicki, you want to give us your perspective mainly from the LP perspective?
I'm glad to be here with you. New York State Common is the third largest pension fund in the country. We're at about $190 billion, and we invest on behalf of 1 million or more employees and retirees and their beneficiaries.
Scott, I'd like to come back to you. You explained sort of the framework that you've been working on developing for measurement and really allowing for benchmarking, and how you define sustainability, which is key so that it just doesn't get lumped with everything else. But from your perspective, where are you seeing the greatest opportunities right now for Guggenheim and for investment, for focusing on returns and ESG?
So, for instance, we've financed a number of peaking plants that are related to solar fields. Mm-hmm. So that's been an interesting investment for us. And that, I think, is one of the biggest challenges with this whole asset category, because the minute you lead with that or you lead with sustainability, the bubble over our client's head is, okay, this means this is a lower return asset.
But you described why you focus on it, but how do you try to influence, particularly behavior of companies as a minority shareholder?
So when we meet companies before we invest, I mentioned before, we put them through a diagnostic to determine what we think are the key ESG issues facing their company. Every company is different, but obviously a huge thing for us is human capital.
I think that's exactly right, and I think it's important also to think about the fact that there are sort of I divide the companies into two categories, sort of output positive, which is when people think about sustainability or impact, they think about those companies that are producing a good or product that is good for society. So they're advancing, solar or renewable energy or energy efficiency. So Anne, I'd love for you to talk a little bit from Bank of America's perspective, particularly about your Catalyst Finance initiative, and maybe tell the audience a little bit about what that is, but how Bank of America is really using this and using some pretty innovative means to deploy capital, again, not as concessionary capital, but both for returns and for positive impact.
So it's banks, it's private equity, it's development banks, it's private investors.
And some of the structures that I talked about in terms of the debt and equity instruments that the Bank of America is using is really exactly, it's capturing, it's almost looking at some of this value, at the future value, and capturing it in terms of royalty payments, that if and to the extent it has, so you do know the structuring terms that I talked about, if and when it does have value in the future, it will pay dividends back to the investors, and that's sort of capturing the environmental side. And in terms of reporting, Bank of America is further ahead. With TPG about a year ago, we did a presentation East and West Coast to private equity funds, and 95% of them were there to figure out how they could check the box and whether or not they could assign on to the principles and how they could appease some crazy European LPs who wanted them to talk about ESG. And one of the questions I was asked then again was, in fact, we've been investing this way. We know we have a fiduciary duties as asset managers. Are we going to be breaching our fiduciary duties if we change our focus? And Marcus, particularly, I'd like you to address. You're investing mainly, obviously, outside of the U.S., all outside of the U.S., and really, the issues we're talking about, all ESG and particularly climate, are obviously global. So, what are you seeing in terms of difficulties in putting together investment and financing vehicles, particularly in your markets outside the U.S.?
Of course, it's quite a challenge to get a proper refinancing in place.
I'm hopeful. I'm going to open it up in a minute for questions. So if you guys have burning questions for the panel, you can. But I would love, starting, Anne, with you, for each of you to sort of, if we're projecting out, Cliff was talking 5 years, what do you think is kind of the most innovative that you're seeing right now in terms of new financial instruments, in terms of people who are, again, not deploying concessionary capital, but really investing both for the positive impact and the returns? Scott?
Well, I think that, I don't know if I'm excited about it, but I think that...
You are excited.
I think companies are going to get punished. So I don't know if I'm excited about it.
Okay, no.
But, when you look at...
Wells Fargo, yeah.
Well, I don't know. But you can say that because Bank of America is on the stage.
Yeah. I was pandering.
But, when you look at, for instance, one of the things we talk to our clients about today are utilities.
Papers on economic models that build in climate risk in a new way. And his premise is that all of our economic models underlying everything are wrong for specific reasons, and one of them being that we're headed to a cliff, and all the models are premised on the fact that we're going to gradually apply the brakes, and we're at some point going to have to slam them on. And how do you evaluate that risk from an investor perspective? And it's sort of getting out of the save the polar bears argument, which is part of it, but really looking at the economic risks associated with climate. So my life's goal is to have Chevron convert to one of these things. Is there anybody from Chevron in here? So stay tuned for that. Do we have mics right here?
Hi there, thank you for your panel. My question is for Scott, and it's involved beyond your partnership with WWF, which is a wonderful organization. Is Guggenheim involved in any other partnerships or initiatives that could provide tools that would benefit the investor community in general, and if not, why not?
Well, it's a good question. I would tell you that I'm mostly a student of this, not the developer of tools.
Thank you very much. Join me in thanking the panel.